Okay, so we are going to discuss experiment 7, which talks about write a Java program to implement interfaces. Now, what do you mean by interface? As we have already studied abstract classes, using abstract classes, we can implement abstraction. But there lies a question. Does abstract methods or abstract classes provide complete abstraction? So the answer is, in abstract methods or abstract classes, we can have abstract methods as well as concrete methods. That means it doesn't provide complete abstraction. So here comes an interface, which is a blueprint of a class. That is how we define an interface. It's a blueprint of a class which is used to provide complete abstraction. So basic need of interfaces, if I want to bring an abstraction, complete abstraction to my program, I would use interface. Second main usage of interfaces to implement multiple inheritance, which was assumed, which was said like Java doesn't provide multiple inheritance, whereas using interface, we can implement multiple inheritance in Java. That is the second advantage of using an interface. So before we switch to the program of using an interface, I would quickly run through the basic syntax of an interface. So as you can see, the screen ahead, I have written, so in order to define an interface, I would always write as interface keyword followed with the name of the interface. So in my case, the name of the interface that is given by me is interface demo. Starting with a curly brace and ending with a curly brace. So syntax of interfaces, use the keyword interface followed with interface name. Now within the curly braces, I can have two definitions. One is I can declare fields, or I can have methods inside interfaces. Now fields means here variables and methods. Now what kind of fields and variables does an interface support? So in general, interface supports constant variables. That means if I write integer a is equal to 10, it by default considers this variable as a constant because it automatically writes public static final before integer a. So when I declare a variable integer a, I do not append final keyword, neither do I append static, neither do I append public, because it is taken, it is by default taken by the compiler. So I just need to write integer a is equal to 10, which would be actually considered as public static final variable. That means final constant variables cannot be changed throughout the program. Now, as we have said, interface should contain methods which provides abstraction, which means if I have written any method, for example, here I have written a void show method, it shouldn't contain the body. That is why we haven't written curly braces for this method. And by default, all the methods that are defined inside the interfaces are by nature public and abstract. That's why even if I remove this keyword from here, the compiler will take it automatically, or it will append automatically public before the method. So this is the basic syntax of an interface. Let us see a small demo whereby we are going to see how to define interfaces and how can a class implement those interfaces. So as in the experiment 7, we are talking about multiple inheritance. What does that mean? Multiple inheritance means a class A can implement multiple interfaces. So this is what it means, multiple inheritance. One class can use multiple interfaces. That means this class A should be responsible to define all the methods that are there in interface 1 and interface 2, because both the interfaces are complete abstract in nature. So let us see these both things, how to define an interface and how to implement an interface using a small program. Here we have taken two interfaces. One interface is named as printable and the second interface is known as showable. Printable interface contains an abstract method known as print. As we have mentioned earlier, the methods of interface are public abstract in nature. So even if I have not written here public, it takes by default it as public. Similarly, interface showable contains a variable integer year. Now, all the variables inside interfaces are by default public, static, and final in nature. Now, though if we haven't written here public, static, final, it takes it as a constant. Another function which is abstract in nature under interface showable is void show method, which is public by default. Now we have another class which is going to implement printable interface and showable interface. So if a class is implementing or using interfaces or multiple interfaces, we call this as multiple inheritance. So if a class is using interfaces, we write it as class implements interfaces separated by comma. Now, as interfaces provides complete abstraction, we cannot create object of interfaces. That is why in the main function, we haven't created any instance of interface that we have defined. So for interfaces cannot be instantiated, it means. Therefore, we have to create an object of classes. So here the class we had considered was interface demo1. So we have created an object D for interface demo1, and using this object we would call the functions that were declared by the interfaces. Now, if any class implement the interfaces, we said that whatever methods were there in the interfaces, the abstract methods, has to be completely defined by the class. Therefore, print method, which was abstract in nature, has been defined by the class. Show method, which was abstract in nature, was defined by the class interface demo. The print method defined by the class is printing a message known as hello world, whereas the show abstract method of the showable interface, which is predefined by the class, is printing a message welcome year. Now year is a constant variable here. Now let us try to execute this. Now both the functions are being called using the object d.print and d.show, whereby it has printed the messages written inside or defined inside the methods. Now, as I've mentioned, the year variable that was actually declared inside the interface was a constant by default. So let us see if we can change this constant. Now what I've done is, to the year I'm adding one more value. It is throwing me an error stating the final field showable year cannot be assigned. That means final variables or constant variables cannot be changed. So this was all about experiment 7, which talks about how to implement multiple inheritance using interface.